Hello, everyone, and welcome to an update on the Shetland MRI scanner appeal. We have Anne Frost, host of the I Thought I Knew How podcast, joining us live from the Shetland Islands. And Anne is there visiting for what the newest incarnation of Wool Week looks like, working on some interviews. And she got the chance to catch up with Harriet and Billy Middleton and do some work with the scanner appeal there. So hello and welcome, Anne.
Hi, Erin. Good to talk to you.
You too. So tell us, what does Wool Week in the Shetland Islands turn into in the age of COVID?
Well, it's they had to cancel. They canceled very early on this year. They knew that even with, the unknowns, with all the planning that has to go into it, it was just probably not going to happen. So they canceled pretty early on and started making alternative plans. And what they ended up doing, so the Wool Week is run by the Shetland Amenity Trust, I believe. And they ended up doing, reaching out to some of the teachers and the people who do area tours and things like that, and ask them to put together some videos. So there are videos available on the Shetland Amenity YouTube channel that are different farm tours, information that you would normally get in a lecture up here during Wool Week, but also there are some videos here that are essentially free versions of the classes that are taught here. So you can find those on YouTube. Also, Jameson and Smith put some similar types of videos up. They have the Choose Wool initiative up here, and they have some of those videos. And then I was able to interview some people here, like longer form interviews, sit down and talk with them. And so those interviews are available on the Jameson and Smith YouTube channel as well. I'll also be releasing those interviews as part of my podcast, I Thought I Knew How, but that won't be until probably mid-November before those start coming out. Yeah, and so it's just, they took it all online and got as many people as they could to put activities and information together. And I think it's actually been really an overall good. I mean, ideally we would be here for Wool Week. There'd be 1,000 extra people here celebrating wool and learning about wool. But I think because it had to go online this year, I think more people are getting a glimpse of what it's like to come and be part of that gathering. So,
and I've always been torn because Rhinebeck is our Sheep and Wool Festival, and it's almost the same time. So I haven't figured out places at once, but this is my opportunity. This is huge.
Yeah. And the great thing is that all of those videos are going to stay up. So if you miss them, they're still there. You can come back to them 6 months from now, come back to them 3 years from now. They're still going to be there. So yeah, you can still have your experience.
Although I heard you booked your Airbnb already for next year, right? So
oh, heck yeah. Well, that's a little tip. A little tip. If you want to come to Shetland Wool Week, you need to book as Shetland Wool Week is happening the year before. Yeah, because it is the most popular tourist time here on the island, and it sells out very quickly, the accommodation. But also if you can't find accommodation, still want to come, start looking about 6 weeks ahead of time, because a lot of those people who did book, life happens, they've had to cancel, and more things will come open again. Or some people are notorious for booking 2 places just to be sure. And so they'll start letting go of the second place. And so you can start, looking again and find some housing that way too.
Good tips. And I'm reserving your couch.
What's that?
Reserving a spot on your couch officially.
Okay. Sounds good.
Perfect. Well, so last year you were there for Wool Week to help present the Harriet collection that is based in support of the MRI scanner appeal. So tell us a little bit about the scanner appeal in the first place, and then let's hear how close they are getting to their goal.
Sure. So the Shetland MRI scanner appeal was started by 2 nurses at the Gilbert Bain Hospital here in Lerwick, which is the main town on Shetland. It's the main hospital on Shetland. And Currently, the NHS does not have a MRI scanner in the hospital. And so if there is a diagnosis that needs to be done or emergency care that needs to be done that involves an MRI scanner, they have to either be airlifted if it's a dire emergency, or they have to take the ferry, which is a 12 to 15 hour one-way trip. And people, sometimes they get to the mainland and they have a diagnosis that means they can't come back because the hospital here is not able to treat them. So they end up stuck on the mainland, and they could be there by themselves without a family member, without a caregiver, and they just have to sort of ride through that treatment period on their own. And even if it's not something so dramatic as that, you can imagine if you're doing follow-up care, to have to give up all that time. It typically ends up being a 3-day trip because of how the ferries run. That if you're a parent, you have to find childcare. If you're working, they have to cover for you. You know, all of this hassle that can go on just to go and have a follow-up scan, you know? So as I said, 2 of the nurses here decided, like, enough is enough. We need to get an MRI scanner up here. So what they did was they got approval that if they could acquire a MRI scanner, it could be installed at the hospital. And then the cost of the NHS having to transport people to and from the mainland would be enough to fund the running of the MRI scanner. So the NHS would take it over from there, if you will. So they'll have someone here who can run the scans, and then the scans will actually go to the same doctors on the mainland for a diagnosis. And then if someone needs to travel for treatment, they can at that point. But they don't necessarily have to go on, this 3-day trip just to find out all's fine, or there's this minor thing that they can do here or whatever, so it will eliminate a lot of that back and forth hassle for the residents of Shetland.
And that's amazing because, you don't feel like doing anything when you're feeling crummy anyway, but to travel on top of that,
in the North Sea. It's not an easy ferry crossing a lot of the times. It's a very active up and down experience on many of the crossings. And so, yeah, you can imagine already not feeling well and having to deal with that.
So not only are patients able to get their care right there, like hop in a car and go to it, as opposed to having to take a ferry, they can communicate with the doctors from where they are, and they've pushed a pencil on this where it's actually going to be cost neutral, if not cost savings, because we don't have to pay for travel anymore. We can put that money towards not only maintaining, but hiring a good person to take care of running the MRI scanner at the hospital. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Numbers too.
So they needed to raise 1.65 million pounds, which is about $2 million.
A lot of money.
And they began raising the funds, I want to say January 2019, roughly that time. And there was a woman here named Harriet Middleton who had to go back and forth for some of her own treatment, and she wanted to give back. She wanted to raise some funds. So she started knitting just with her stash. She's a good, honest knitter. She has a sizable stash to draw from, and she started knitting items to sell locally and to tourists. There's lots of cruise ships that come and do day tours here. And so she was set up to do those sales, and other local people saw that she was doing this, and they started bringing her donations of yarn to help, with what she needed to knit. Well, it got to be too much for her to handle on her own. So she invited her sister-in-law to help her, who then said, you know what, this is too much for both of us. We can't knit all of this yarn that we're getting. And so they decided to start the MRI Maakers. Now, Maakers is the word for knitters here. And it's basically a knitting group that would meet up every 2 weeks, and they would take the yarn that they'd been donated, and they would sit and knit with each other for a while. But then 2 weeks later, they'd meet again and drop off what they'd made and take more yarn home. Well, again, someone said, you know what? I think we could do better. I think that, Harriet, if you designed a hat, we could sell the pattern. And then people all over could knit this pattern, and we could, you know, still be knitting things to sell, but we could also be selling this pattern. Well, Harriet is not a pattern user. Many of the knitters up here, they were taught to knit by memorizing the number counts of the Fair Isle, of the stitches needed to create a Fair Isle motif. So I actually have an interview with Harriet in my episode list of the How to Knew How podcast. You can go back and hear her talk about it herself. She'll talk about how she knows the patterns as 1 and 3 and 3 and 1, you know, like she just has the numbers memorized. So she went ahead and knit a hat using the colors of the scanner logo, the MRI scanner appeal logo, which are blues and yellows and whites. And then her son, Billy, went through and took the hat and created the Fair Isle chart stitch by stitch. You know, just went through and graphically represented it, and then they printed it up and released it. So you have one of, there's one of the patterns.
I'm gonna have to like piece this in, I think.
So you can see that's the official hat pattern there. And it draws on lovely traditional motifs, and people started knitting it. It was my first Fair Isle project that I ever knit, was this hat. And one of the knitting guilds, was it the Minnesota Guild? I want to say it was the Minnesota Knitters Guild, decided to do it as a worldwide knit along. So on Knit in Public Day in 2019, that was the start of it. And they started promoting it and putting it out there, like, we're going to be doing this knit along. And so they sold thousands of these patterns, and everyone cast on and Worldwide Knit in Public Day, and it just grew from there. The word really started to spread. And at this point, they have raised, just from the efforts of the MRI Maakers, so selling the patterns, selling finished items from their website, which is mrimaakers.com, they have raised a total of 96,814 pounds and 37 pence.
Wow. All from knitting.
All from knitting. So nearly 100,000 pounds of the funds raised toward the fundraiser has come from the efforts of Harriet Middleton, Billy Middleton, the MRI Maakers, and all the people around the world who have been buying the patterns and buying the finished items. It's been really amazing. And
it's such a well-written pattern. We used it as a knit along last summer. I think it was August as well. And we were able to take that and play around with the different colors like they do in such amazing Shetland knitting tradition, and really make these our own. The blues and whites and yellows are beautiful. And if you see another picture that you say, oh, those colors inspire me, you know, take a look at the wall behind me. We can put them together in whatever inspires you, and really excited about how it turned out. So I did greens and purples.
It's so
and
pretty.
Blues, and just amazing. Same hat, what a difference in the color.
Right.
But you make it your own, and the pattern is so easy to follow in terms of charting and cast on, use this size, keep on going with this chart, then this chart, then this chart, to put all of these motifs together. You can see the snow comes through here. There's a mock rib at the bottom. I mean, just, you put all these pieces together and you get a wondrous hat.
Yeah, I don't have all of mine here because I'm traveling, so I only brought my 2-color version. So this is my 2-color version that I did, same pattern, but all of the background colors I did actually in the Morehouse Blackberry, and then all of the pattern colors are in the Morehouse Natural. So I really like the original hat, and I've knit it several times in different color combinations, but I also wanted one that was like a little more elegant, a little more, you know, plain. And so I have, this is my 2-color version that I did.
Oh, beautiful. And it's just to think about the inverse of the colors, where you put the dark one in the background. Most people gravitate towards the lighter background, and it's stunning.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. I wear this hat a lot. But it's also important to throw in there that Harriet didn't just design the hat, because the hat was so popular. She got requests for other accessories. So they did fingerless gloves, proper gloves, a headband. The headband was actually the second pattern, and a cowl, a full cowl. So I have my cowl here. This is not like the original cowl. I've modified this one. Erin, maybe, do you have your cowl there by any chance?
All here.
Okay, so this is my modified cowl. Erin has the original cowl. In the original cowl, you actually knit it and steek it so that it is open. It ends up being like a short scarf. And then you can see on Erin, you put loops on one side and buttons on the other, or toggles on the other, and then you can arrange it in different ways so that you can wear it off your shoulder, you can wear it like a vest as she had it at first, you can cross it and connect it that way. If you're afraid of steeking, which I know some people are, but you shouldn't be, I knit that one, but I also knit one that just kept it straight. So you just leave the steek stitches off, and then one repeat of this pattern here. This is one chart here. And you just leave that off. And that way you just leave it as a tube, and you can wear it, you know, crossed in front like that, and then have your jacket sort of hold it in place for you like that. So I've been wearing both of these a lot here on Shetland. It's very, very windy. And it's nice for like closing up the gap around your jacket and keeping your ears warm. So
And what I'd love to see is how the techniques in some of the earlier projects then make its way into the later ones. So the headband that you described, the second project, is knit in the round, and it ends up being about this tall, and then you fold it in half and sew it together. And of course you can play around with things like a provisional cast on and a 3-needle bind off, which I think is what you did on your cowl, isn't it?
yeah, so the pattern doesn't suggest a provisional cast on, but if you use a provisional cast on when it's time to close up the tube so they double back on each other, then you can just do a 3-needle bind off. It's very, very quick and easy.
Yeah, so all these different techniques come together, and that's one of the things that I love playing with in our knit along group, the Morehouse Merino Flock, because we were able to take something like that headband, and then Anne took it and applied that idea by playing with the number of stitches to turn it into a cowl that is knit as a tube. And because Fair Isle knitters generally don't like to purl any more than the rest of us, and we think color work in purling would be even more of a something to do. So there you are, just keep knitting in the round, and then as she said, fold that over. You could sew it together. If you started with a provisional cast on, you could do a 3-needle bind off. It's gorgeous. And it's making it your own, which is even cooler. So you have made what sound like, quote, so many modifications, but if we think about this, right, 6-colored chart into a 2-colored chart, which is quite easy to do, right? And the chart, all you do is make a black and white copy of it, right? There's a knitting tip right there. So that's really easy. And then you decided, okay, I'm gonna do one less repeat, multiply by the number of gauge stitches. Oh, I know how big this is going to be already. Fantastic, I like that size, and run with it. So well done.
Thank you. And well done, Harriet. Good job. That's amazing. Last year I was teasing Harriet that, you know, I think they were over 30,000 by the end of Wool Week last year. And I told them, you know, you're going to get to 100,000. You're going to get, and she was like, oh, no, maybe 50, maybe 50,000. But you could tell she was still very like unsure that would even happen. And they've blown past that at this point, and they're very close to 100,000. So the scanner appeal itself is nearing completion. The funds raised are getting very close. They're less than 100,000 pounds away at this point. But I really would love to see them hit 100,000 pounds with the fundraising from the MRI Maakers. That would just be so cool to get to that milestone, you know?
All right. So 1.65 million pounds altogether. And the total is somewhere north of 1.55 million pounds that's been raised.
At this point, yeah.
Over 96,000 of those 1.55 million pounds have come just from knitting, the MRI Maakers activity. Yep. So And what can we do to help get them over the 100,000 pound mark?
Okay, well, good that you asked. So if you go to mrimaakers.com, which is MRIMAAKERS.com, you can find that they are selling finished items. So finished Harriet's hats, gloves, also just sort of odds and ends, like things that people in the group wanted to knit so there's a sweater that goes up. Cockle shell lace is a popular lace pattern up here, and oftentimes there'll be a cockle shell lace pattern, lace item up, or a shawl. So just take a look at their finished items and see what you can pick up there. That's one option. The other thing is you can get a complete set of all 6 of the patterns. So they're normally 4 pounds each. So that would be 24 pounds to get all 6 of them. You can get all 6 of them as a set right now for 20 pounds. So, and that would get you all the paper patterns mailed to you, plus PDF versions of the patterns. So if you use something like Knit Companion or something like that to read your patterns, you will have that version as well. Also, I just found out that they have a lot of the paper patterns because, like everyone, they were planning on being at different events this year and selling the paper patterns. And as the fundraising comes to a close, they have a glut of these paper patterns available. So if you don't need all 6, if you really just want to buy 1 or 2 of each of them, they are selling at 25% off. So you can pick up the patterns individually, or you can get all 6 for 20 pounds. And either way, you're going to get a discount going forward because they are so close to their goal. So, and I also know that Erin has the patterns in stock at Morehouse Farm. She's prepaid for them. You can get them from her. And then you can also, if you want to do like a 2-color Morehouse version or the 6-color Morehouse version that Erin was showing, they can talk you through the color choices as you order the patterns from them, or from you, I should say.
However we can get that, because as Anne said, all the proceeds from the pattern sales go directly to the Shetland MRI scanner appeal, and it feels like we are this close, because
So
sitting here talking about this now, remembering last summer when it seemed like it was so far away, and it just means, right, how do you make a sweater 1 stitch at a time? How do you raise money for a scanner, an MRI scanner, right?
one pattern sale at a time. And it's so close now that they are actually looking for the scanner. Like, they have enough to purchase the scanner at this point. The other funds will be in retrofitting the hospital space and everything, but they have enough now that they can actually start shopping for the scanner, which is amazing. It's great. It seemed like so much at the start, but the people have really stepped up in a lot of different ways. Most of the funds were raised locally. Most of the funds were people having birthday parties and asking people to donate to the appeal, kids who would buy lollipops in bulk and then sell them at school and take the proceeds from that and donate it. I mean, just people have been so creative with their fundraising efforts here. And a lot of that really started after the Harriet's Hat project kicked in, because the fundraising was very, very slow to start. But when Harriet's Hat pattern started gaining momentum and started getting worldwide attention, it really excited the other people here in Shetland, and they started looking for ways to help out. So car washes, dances, Sunday teas, all sorts of different events cropped up along in the islands, and it got them what they needed. It became a community effort. It was really great.
That's amazing. And I think that's one of the things that I love so much about the knitting community, is that coming together to support a common vision, a common cause. We can do this together. And it was amazing to see all of this, say, side effects, which usually sounds like a bad thing, but they're pretty amazing, right? So look at the inspiration that one knitter, right, gave to a community right there. We have a need, let's find a way to do this. Thinking about it from our perspective in our knit along group, how many people now have the confidence to try a multicolor project in Fair Isle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As I said, this is the first Fair Isle project I finished. I started a scarf and I did not get far because I was having a hard time, and I just thought, I don't need to do this. I'll go on to something easier. But the fact that this was a way that I could help spread the word about a cause that I thought was important, it gave me the motivation to see it through. And because of that, I've learned this skill that otherwise, I mean, honestly, I sort of have the personality where if it's hard, I'm not going to do it. So who knows if I ever would have picked up Fair Isle again, but because it had this wonderful cause behind it, I really wanted to finish it, and then I got hooked. So, and I think it's been that way for other people too, where they were very nervous about Fair Isle. They thought they were going to mess up. And so they hadn't been getting to it. They just have been continuing to back burner it. But I think because of the story behind it, a lot more people were willing to try Fair Isle. And then from there, people have been branching off into other Fair Isle projects. So it's not just been about raising the funds for this one thing. I think it's done a lot for preserving and popularizing Fair Isle over the last year.
Yeah. And one of your interviews is with Terry Malcolmson, right? A Fair Isle designer.
Yes.
Is right there in the Shetland Islands, and her grandmother Wilma is the patron of Shetland Wool Week. So Katie's cap,
right,
pattern that you've seen, if not, go check it out, the official pattern of Shetland Wool Week. That's one that you can take these Fair Isle skills you've developed and now go make that hat, right? Not think twice about it. So it's replicable all along the way, and this whole new world opens up of knitting once you have the confidence to start this and give it a try.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so every year Shetland Wool Week puts out a new hat pattern. And so this is Katie's Kep is the 7th, and until Wool Week next year, because with everything shut down, Wilma is going to carry on and be the patron for next year as well. So Katie's Kep will be a 2-year pattern, is my understanding. So that's a free pattern available at shetlandwoolweek.com. And I know we did a knit along in the Morehouse 2-ply sport. And it was wonderful seeing the different colors that people decided to try out for that.
So if you're going to start Fair Isle, what tip would you give someone? Like, what is something that you wish you knew before you started?
I wish I knew not to be afraid to space my stitches, because that's really the trick. With people are so worried about puckering with Fair Isle. And I think that you really need to just go ahead and give yourself the space that you need as you're doing it. So as you're knitting and you're going to switch from one color to the next, go ahead and give it a yank, and get those stitches off to the side, and before you start with that next color, because you can always come from behind and sort of pull it a little tighter if you need to. So I was always too afraid of, like, if I space it too much, that's what's going to happen. But no, that's what I found is I really need to give my work a good space before I transition. And then what else would I say? I think just don't be afraid to try, because, if you're really intimidated by it, you could start with a cuff or just something small to give it a try. In fact, one of the classes that was put up as part of the virtual Wool Week is with Hazel Tyndall to do a bookmark. So you're only knitting a tube about maybe an inch and a quarter, but you're doing it in Fair Isle, and then when you're done, you steek it. So you get to do the little cut, and it's a taste. And if it's a little tight, it's a bookmark. You can try another one and just give it a go, and not feel like so much depends on it, like it's a whole big project. It's just find something small and give it a try.
Yeah. So we did how do you swatch in the round with 2-color Fair Isle. similar idea, and it works out to be a drink coaster.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
So head over to the Morehouse Farm Merino blog. You can find that there. Give it a whirl. It's got step-by-step instructions on how to do that, just playing around with 2 colors. And it's a great way to swatch too. So you have something useful at the end, and then you have a whole collection after you've done a bunch of Fair Isle projects.
Yeah, and that's the thing. If that's a question that's very often asked up here in the classes. I've noticed it last year anyway. Almost every class, Fair Isle class I was in, someone asked, "How do you swatch for Fair Isle?" And the answer was, first of all, you always want to do it in the round because you're going to be knitting the item in the round.
Yeah.
And then locally, they said, "Well, just knit a hat." Just knit a hat, or make yourself some fingerless gloves, or do a cuff, or do some coasters. Like, just think what you need, what you can use, and do your swatching by making that smaller thing, you know, because then you have something useful when you're done. A hat, even if your gauge is too tight or too loose, you'll be able to find someone who can wear that hat, that you can pass it along to, you know, or you can, if you do some coasters, you can have some coasters, you know. But that's the answer they always get. They don't waste their time with swatching. They're always making something useful.
And I love that fearless knitting. Just get up and go. We can adjust along the way if we need to. If we have to rip it back a little bit, oh well, that's more knitting that we get to do. Yeah. So
we like to knit, so if we get to knit something a second time, that's okay.
Right. A good pattern is like your favorite movie or your favorite song. You don't just knit it over and over again. So let's start with that expectation in mind, and here we go. So, well, Anne, thank you so much for joining us all the way from the Shetland Islands and giving us an update on the scanner appeal. I can't believe that we are within sight of helping finish the fundraising for this project. It has been a journey, and the people that we've met because of this, including us.
I know, we met because of this. We live like 6 or 7 miles from each other, and we met through doing the Harriet's Hat project. It's crazy.
Which is pretty amazing, and just gets us to think about what a small world it is. So really excited to help get the MRI Maakers to their goal of 100,000 pounds and the Shetland MRI scanner appeal across the way. So make sure you visit the MRI Maakers website so you can order the digital patterns. They also have hard copies. We've got them here too at Morehouse Farm, and all those proceeds go right to the scanner appeal. And if you're so inclined, I think they'll take a donation as well, just to help give a little extra nudge. And hey, if everybody pledged £1 or $1 or whatever change was in your couch cushions, I bet we get there pretty darn quick. So
yeah, they do. They have a donation option there right on the MRI Maakers website too. Yeah.
For sure. Don't forget to go check out Anne's podcast, I Thought I Knew How, where you get to hear directly from Harriet Middleton, the lady who designed the hat in the first place, and then a few other greats. Did I see you have not only Terry Malcolmson, but Jeanette Budge? Can you give us a...
Budge, yes. I have interviews with Jeanette Budge, Ella Gordon, another designer that's very fun. She was a treat to sit down with. So who else did I have? I had Terry. Chris Dyer is a crofter and archaeologist up here. The first half of the interview, we were just talking about the history and archaeology of Shetland. It was so fascinating. And then we started talking about Shetland sheep after that, but just sitting and talking with him. And then another woman named Barbara Gray, who is the chairman of the board of trustees for the Shetland Textile Museum. And we talked about all the different textile traditions up here in Shetland, because they also were weavers, and they have a tradition here called tatted rugs, which to us looks like latch hook, but it was a way that they made bed coverings, and they did it by weaving flat fabric, and then they would sew loops on it and cut the loops, and then it would make like a pile bed cover that they would then, because it gets cold up here, it's cold and windy. So they had those for their bed covering. So we talked a little bit about that. And then of course we got into the knitting and talked about the history of the knitting traditions up here too.
Awesome. So those will be coming out, you said November-ish?
Yeah, they'll start coming out in November. They came out as video interviews on the Jameson and Smith YouTube, so people can go find those there. But if you also subscribe to the I Thought I Knew How podcast through whatever podcasting app you use, I'll release them as episodes of my podcast as well, starting in, probably early November.
Oh, fantastic. And then you'll have just enough time to get caught up on those as we talk about some of our next knit-alongs as we work towards. And Anne is going to join us as a guest host for some lace, right? As we're talking here about Shetland knitting and Shetland lace, we're also going to venture into the finale of our series of taming lace this year. So Anne's going to join us in January for Tansy by Louisa Harding. Gorgeous, gorgeous beaded cape. So we'll look for Morehouse Merino flock where we can reconnect with Anne.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to the knit-alongs. And as always, I love seeing everybody in your Facebook group. It's a really great community. Everyone's very supportive there. So I recommend everyone hop in. Morehouse Merino Flock Group. It's a great community.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being a part of it and for joining us here today in the middle of all of your interviews. That sounds like a whirlwind schedule. So thank you again. And can't wait to catch up with you when you get home.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I'll talk to you soon.